And now we dive deep into our souls. This was the end of our last interview. Jet and I spontaneously decided to continue this wonderful interview stream. And for those who have not listened or seen through the first part or the first two parts, I'm talking to Jared Franks, a psychotherapist, public speaker, spiritual mentor, to people who are ready to wake up from the craziness of our ego world. So let's dive today into another world, explore a little bit more of the world and the joy of our soul. Hello and warm welcome to listeners to New Generation Women. And I'm Janine van Zenos in Munich. And in New Zealand this time, not in Sydney, is Jared Franks. Warm welcome. Hello, Jared. What are you doing in New Zealand?
Actually, I have some events here. I've got a 4-day silent retreat and a 2-day skills training retreat where I'm training people to become therapists.
Oh, wow. Did you just leave the silent retreat so you could talk?
Actually, it starts tonight. So
Okay. And what is the time now? We have almost midnight. So, what is your time in New Zealand?
it's 9 o'clock in the morning.
How are actually the people in New Zealand? Because we just heard about Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she has been adored around the world. Are the people reflecting her politics, her charms, her reflection, her compassion?
I think so. I think, and that's how she got elected. I think New Zealand has always been kind of a little bit of enlightened, at least I can say, compared to Australia, where I'm from. Um,
Yes.
in the sense that certainly in the relationship to the indigenous cultures, if you look at how the white Australians have treated the Aboriginals in Australia, it's very different to New Zealand. Not that New Zealand is perfect and they have issues there, but there's a certain kind of way that the Maori culture is lifted up and respected, and there's a certain amount of care there that I think in Australia is lacking somehow.
I think in the rest of the world, actually. And yes, it would be wonderful to have her one day as an interview guest. But there are some more interviews I have to do and work myself towards it. So we said, let's dive into our soul today. And I like to pick up the end again of our last interview when I told you that I went to my doctor with pain in my shoulders and neck. And he was very relaxed and said to me, by the way, okay, I hear you. You must be very unhappy, Janine. And I said, no, 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 absolutely not. I don't feel my soul feels very happy. And it just spontaneously came out of my mouth without thinking. And I've almost felt offended when he said this because in my soul, I felt at the same time, strangely enough, very happy and very successful with my life. And at that time, you said, Janine, you nailed it. Don't spend any second further on your ego. So that went well after the interview for a week or two. And then something big happened, another outside world, something really big. And I was completely lost in fear and panic and old stuff and the mind fuck. And I was remembering while I went through the motions, and they were really horrible. And I was remembering that you said that you had this really deep anger and that you were sitting and present with the anger. You didn't do anything about it. You didn't want to fix it. So while I go through these horrible emotions, I remember that and I think, just sit with it. And I go out of my bed. It's nighttime. Nighttime is almost like, it catches you from behind. You want to sleep silently and suddenly things come up. So I sit down, I face it. I think, be brave, just face it. Don't do anything. Don't fix it. Nothing happens. It just gets worse. And then I think like, okay, Eckhart Tolle, just go to Eckhart Tolle. What did he say about panic attacks? So now it's so nice to laugh about it, a few days later. And that I couldn't rationally even hear what he was saying. So this didn't help. So I think after hours of going through this horrible wave of panic, it was becoming silent. And like almost something surrendered and I was falling asleep. And the next day I was really exhausted, but I exhausted on a surface level, not on a deeper level. And on a deeper level, I could feel there was a quality of surrendering, but I don't know, it was a very strange feeling on the surface level. I was not struggling and beating it, but I was just thinking about again what you said, don't spend another second with your ego. And I spent the whole night with my ego. And I remember that I talked to other people when you are on a spiritual path that we all have in common so far, not being enlightened yet. Um, that we do have those dips and we do fall deep, but we get out of it much quicker than before we started to go on the path. Now, we all said we really do try to hang on to something, to do something that we learned. And mostly we fail. Mostly it's just like you feel completely helpless, almost like in prison of your ego. And at some time, it lets go of you quicker than it did before. And here's where you come into play. And I wonder if you can walk us through how, when you say you just, in quotes, just sit with it, be present with emotion, if it's anger or fear or terror or panic, whatever, or pain, and you don't do anything.
Yeah, this is really fascinating to me to look at because listening to what you said, it's both beautiful in that I feel like there was an honest and true opening that was different to how you would deal with it in the past,
Mhm.
and at the same time, there's a few things you said about it was still here that shows me and reflects that there's a part of you that still was looking for it to go away. And this is where it gets subtle, is that to really meet it and to really surrender, you actually don't have this impulse for it to go away. It's really such a deep surrender that it almost feels like a death. It feels like,
Mhm.
well, you're actually opening to the possibility that this feeling will be here forever, which is
Mhm.
which is very ironic because you actually do that on the basis that you know that it will end. Because as you said, it disappeared. And if you look at any emotion you've ever had, or any panic you've ever had, or any mind attack, you can see that it does end. They have a beginning, they have a middle, and they have an end. And so,
Well, they do have a yes, they do
yeah.
have a climax. They start slowly and then it goes into the peak and then it falls almost apart. But I do like what you say, and I do know from the talks with other friends, you are so consumed by the emotion, by the pain, fear, or panic or anger, that in the time I'm feeling it, it feels like an ocean of foreverness. It feels like this is never going to end. It feels like I almost haven't learned anything 24 years before this.
Yes,
And that makes it so frightening.
that's the doorway, because the fact is it does end because it's an experience, it's a feeling. Anything within the realm of the mental, emotional, physical, and circumstantial will end, guaranteed. It will end because it's within the world of form, and everything in form has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a birth and a death. And by so in knowing that, you can be happy. You can say, well, I know that this panic will end. So while it's here, really,
You're happy.
it's such a paradox in a way. So then while it's here, it feels like it will never end, but you know it will. And then you can say, well, if it's here, it's here. Let me open to it fully. Let me actually be overwhelmed by it as if it will be forever. And what happens is, in that willingness, in that surrender, you give up the struggle and you give up the fight. And in giving up the struggle and the fight, whatever this energy is, whether it's fear or terror or rage or sadness, it actually just passes through much quicker and easier in your now that you're not fighting it, now that you're not resisting it, now that you're not telling a story about it, identifying with it, and using it to suffer more. So you just give in, surrender, open, and it just passes through like a wave of energy.
Okay, let me just know. I I so hear you. It was very funny, not funny. I sometimes even do have black humor in those moments. I can catch myself in this. Um, but I was very aware when it was happening because I knew this is what I'm going to start the interview with. So some part of me said, "Be very aware of what is happening because you will talk about it." You know, that was happening at the same time. Um, it is like in this moment, even saying that might also be the concept. I'm saying to myself, because I just have myself then, okay, just surrender, don't fight it. But then it feels like it's getting worse. I think that's getting worse that makes it really frightening. The easy part or the beautiful part is like the day when I wake up or when I went through that wave, it's like almost a cleansing. You feel, it's like a deep cleansing. And you feel very soft. And also how people relate to you. They are mirroring the softness in you. It feels like a whole layer has broken away. But still, I'm I'm in terror when I think about going through that again. And from all the other people I know who come with different personalities, they have the same. Um, Sometimes it's about when you have sadness. It's a sadness like when you watch also a movie that brings the sadness out because you feel that sadness and you watch a really sad movie and it feels good to cry. It feels like a relief in the moment you can let that sadness out. So that's not the part that I mean, but that part when you are in absolute panic of something that might come again or helplessness. Um,
I,
that's what I'm talking about. That's when I couldn't even say, oh, fully surrender to it, don't fight it, even see the beauty of it.
yeah, so what I'm saying is to not talk to yourself during. If you're talking to yourself, it means you're actually still avoiding the direct experience because terror is terror. It's not a thought. And there might be a thought that triggers it, but that's still not a direct experience. So to actually stop telling a story, stop rationalizing it or telling yourself just surrender, because really surrender is surrender. It's like you lie down and you open and you give up your resistance. That's not a thought. Thinking is actually still a way of putting your attention up in your head instead of down in the body where the emotions are. And so, and I would argue that if you really deeply surrender to the terror, this panic
Mm,
terror, that actually you will feel a catharsis in the same way that you described the crying in a sad movie, that it feels good, that it actually at some level all human egos have a deep terror of death, and that terror of death shows up in the human ego as different layers, like terror of failure, terror of not being loved, terror of embarrassment or shame, or the terror of the unknown monster in the future or the unknown monster inside. But all of those actually are just different forms of the terror
mm,
of death, of annihilation, of non-existence. And
mhm,
so actually that terror is hiding in the cells, in the subconscious of every ego. And to actually fully and deeply open to that terror and actually just let it be here. Actually the first thing that happens is it gets stronger. That's the way it works. So that's actually a confirming sign, believe it or not. And you say get worse, but even that word
mm,
worse really reflects the fact that you don't like it and you don't want it to be there, and that's fine. That's of course understandable. But to really surrender, you don't say it's getting worse. Maybe it's getting bigger, sure, but you really, it's confirming. Let it get as big as it can. Let it be absolutely intense, and surrender, and then you will discover what is really here, what is really bigger, this terror or you? Can this terror really touch you? Does it really kill you? And if you really surrender, you'll see this terror is just a movement of energy, vibration through the body, and that who you are, there's this pure consciousness here. There's this beingness, awareness that is here, that is absolutely untouched by the terror, that no matter how strong that terror gets, it never touches your absolute essence of pure being. And the only way to discover that directly is to let it come and let it be as big as it can be. Let it be totally overwhelming and then see what happens.
That's very inviting. I mean, that feels very charming and sweet. And I hope I'm not going to have another experience to, talk about this last next time. But I do understand, of course, what you mean. But of course, it doesn't feel. Um, it feels. I can relate to when you say, "Let it be as big as possible,"
Mhm.
so then you can feel that it will never touch your essence, and then the fear of the fear. The fear of not being loved, the fear of failure, that can disappear because you go really through that. Theoretically speaking, it's easy to say that in your mind, but then the experience is different. And when you say, don't talk about it, don't even, I can see myself already, next time when I might have to go through that again, they say, don't talk to yourself, don't say things like worse, big. I can see already the humor and the comedy in the whole thing while I'm trying to hold on to something. Surrender. But I don't know where the bottom is to press surrender and say, I press surrender and I do surrender. I don't know. I'm a very strong willed person, but I've never been able to use willpower to surrender. And for people who are using their will so much, like in our culture, how do you surrender? How is it a willingness? How do you come close to a feeling of surrendering?
It's a beautiful question because, in a way, many spiritual seekers are really at that point. I spoke about it recently in a retreat that there is no how, because it's not a doing, and that
Mm,
I don't mean that as a as a sticker that you or a magnet that you put on your fridge, but really that's the truth. That in the moment of surrender, it's the giving up of trying to do anything, and it's really an allowing of whatever is here to be here. And in some way, you can say that that's what the ego is, a resistance to the present moment. That we resist what's here because we're afraid of it, because we want to be in control, and because there's a sense that I am small and the world is big. And
mm,
if I surrender, if I say yes fully to this moment, that I will somehow lose my boundaries, I will die. And actually that's the truth, in the sense that the ego will die. In a full yes to the present moment, the ego cannot survive that. And so there's an identification with the ego, the sense that I am my thoughts, I am my body, I am my feelings. And so that if I fully say yes to the present moment, then who am I? Then I lose myself. And this is this moment where it's really grace, to be honest. It's grace. It's like you can't manufacture it, you can't force it to happen. You can only recognize that there is nothing you can do, that the world is as it is, that this present moment is already as it is, and that your resistance to it does nothing but create suffering in your body, suffering in your emotions, and suffering in your mind and in your life. And so, just by hearing that, perhaps some part of you can recognize the truth of that, and then something happens where in the moment some grace comes over you, where maybe you remember these words, or who knows what happens, and somehow you let go. Somehow you stop struggling, you stop fighting, and you simply say, okay, if this is the moment I die, then so be it, I die. And yes, it sounds dramatic.
gets bigger. Don't want to say it gets worse because I remember that you told me don't say it's getting worse, but I think now, oh, it's getting bigger now. The interview is really reaching its climax. So if I'm ready to die, um,
Yes, well, really, and if you read
oh
any kind of
dear.
spiritual book, and if you read what Eckhart said, that Eckhart's awakening happened in the night. He had this
Mm,
terror come over him, and he said, I can't live with myself." And in that
mhm,
moment, he really said, "Well, who am I? There's apparently two me's." And in that moment, he this grace came over, and there was a surrender, and it felt like he was dying. And that's really the same in my lineage, which starts with Ramana Maharshi. His story is that at age 16 or 17, he had this enormous terror of death, and he thought, well, you know what, I'm gonna lie down on the floor and I'm gonna face my own death. And in that, he lay down and he faced his death, and then he discovered what doesn't die. He discovered what was left after he said yes to death, and he discovered his own being, his own presence, his own essence was still here, and it had no age, it had no birth date, it had no death date. And so it sounds dramatic, and I can say it is dramatic in a sense. It's a major fundamental part of your existence. If you actually are willing to wake up, it's not a small thing, it is a big thing. And so, what I would just add to this is that you generally don't come to this point of willingness to face your own death unless the suffering has been strong enough,
Mm,
generally. And
okay.
and so
Hmm.
that's generally how it works. That maybe if you're listening to this interview, and certainly this was true for me, that the suffering of being a human being got so great that I was willing to look outside my mind. I was willing to look for what is true. Where is happiness? Where is freedom? How can I find it beyond what I already knew? And that led me to the recognition that the source of my suffering was this ego, this identity that I had in my head, this story that I told about myself and about who I am and my history and who likes me and who doesn't, and how good I am and how bad I am. And then recognizing that all my suffering was centered around this story I was telling myself about myself, and that in a moment of surrender, that there was a certain kind of death, a facing of my death as this person, as Jared, as this somebody. And that in facing the death of Jared, I discovered what is prior to name, what is here that has no name, what is here that is before Jared's story. So who knows who's ready? It's like a fruit that ripens, and some moment, random moment, it drops from the tree. And so I have no formula for you, but
Mm.
to say that let your mind open to what is beyond your mind. Let your mind open to the possibility that who you are is not a story, not a person, not an idea.
Well, there was when I had that panic attack, and that was like long time I didn't have that. So it was years ago I had a last one. And for me, the story is about financial matter or fear of existence. So really being broke, totally broke, and out there on the street, and I'm landing there. So it's existential fear, really deep one. And looking at my childhood, I do understand, but it doesn't make the story go away if you're not working through it. I could understand that. So there, in the night, I was almost thinking. Why am I not going free will on the street and just live on the street? So I'm not afraid of it anymore that I'm landing on the street. And I thought like, shit, Eckhart Tolle was in a park bank. Maybe I'm going to have to land there too. At least I should go to Spain or something where it's warmer than here in Germany. So I did have that thoughts getting like face it or go through it, that you're not afraid of it so much anymore. I remember there was a sequence in the movie Forrest Gump. And, his friend who has lost his legs, he was so bitter that he couldn't walk anymore, and he was an athlete and he couldn't fight for his country anymore. He has lost his legs as a soldier. And there was one point he was fighting. He was just fearless. He was on his boat. He was on the ocean out there. Forrest Gump was in his naive mode, watching him, I think. And he was just fighting with God. It was just fighting and get me, and I'm ready to die. And he was jumping with his no legs into the ocean. And I don't know how that scene ended, but he got very soft and gentle, and he got artificial legs, and you could see complete transformation in happening and the character happening at the end of the movie. So he totally had embraced it and made peace with it. He even had a new wife. So you could see there was a deep peace and a deep love for the life how it was now, even with no legs. And everybody could also see, wow, he was not that angry soldier anymore. He was becoming a gentle, loving, open soul. Now that, I think, stands for the transformation of the whole part. Is this what you're talking about?
Yes, people also refer to it as Dark Night of the Soul, and that's fine. But it's kind of this willingness to die to wake up to what is true, because you only die to our ideas of what is true, because what is true cannot die. And so
Mhm.
we're sort of conditioned to believe that, yes, that we can't handle living on the street, we can't handle losing our legs. These two things actually were both very dominant for me in my depression and anxiety, was this terror of living on the street, just like you said. And certainly many people I work with have that same fear. And also because of I had image stuff, so the idea of like losing a limb was fascinating to me, because I thought I would die not from not being able to function, but because of what people might think of me. And 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 actually I remember the moment where I actually did face living on the street, but it was not by going out and doing it, but by internally opening to it and saying yes, which is exactly what I've been talking about facing what we're afraid of. It's not actually going out into the world and doing it. It's actually internally saying yes. It's like, what if you did live on the street? And I actually remember visualizing leaving my apartment and walking to the park and lying down under a tree. And I took a pill
Well,
of
that's Australia, Jared. That's not Germany. I mean, in Australia, landing on the street, I'm sorry, that's a little bit different.
a certain
But I do
luxury.
might have, but I do might save some time, some money for my plane ticket to Australia. And if I, face that fare, I book my plane to Australia. So,
Yes.
if I'm landing on the street, I'd rather do it in a warm country. But go ahead,
but
please.
but but really it was in that moment I had to face like pure shame and embarrassment,
Yes,
what my family
yes.
and friends would think of me. And I had to face the not knowing where my next meal would come from. And really when I faced it, I lay down under this tree, and I just felt absolute bliss. I felt like, it was so simple, there was nothing to do. I felt totally okay, and that somehow in facing it, the monster was gone.
Hmm.
Because that's what I'm speaking about, is that
Yes,
these
yes.
fears are mostly irrational in a sense. I mean, I do understand that there is a certain possibility of living on the street, but here you are, you're not living on the street right now. And,
Hmm.
and, and I doubt that you will. But these fears are all internal fears, and so internally is where we face them. You don't have to go out and physically live on the street to face your fear. That's a little misguided. It's actually to meet your fear directly and just let yourself be afraid of what you're afraid of and say yes.
I had another one of those panic attacks. I was years ago, and I remember there was a kind of a funny story. And my girlfriend, she's an artist, she did a whole picture on this, and people loved hearing the story because they would stand in front of the picture and say, "What is that?" And she would tell the story of her friend. Now the story goes like this: I'm um, I'm having a very high fever, and I'm in an enrollment phase for a very large company, and I have to fill in that application form, and I have a deadline. And if I'm not meeting that deadline, I'm not getting the project. And that project was, again, really meeting my needs, financial needs. So I'm in terror again. I'm not meeting the deadline. I'm not filling in the application. I had a very high fever. I could barely function. And I'm seeing myself in my, I mean, I should be bored by that story by now, but I'm seeing that story again. I'm landing on the street, and then even I have a fever, and I'm pitying myself like, oh my gosh, and I'm so talented, and this is how I ended. And so, and then in that moment, okay, I don't know where that comes from, but it has been my safety story. Now you want, of course, that I will let that go. And no, I need, it's so fun. I need to hold on to that story. So I think about it. How about if you're going to prison? And in that moment, like, oh, if you go to prison, yes, you could do, finally, you could do your radio show and live on it. You get your rent paid, you get your food, you do life behind the bars. You can talk about everything with everybody because you sit already in prison. So you can really make it a wonderful show. And then I thought, oh, and I'm going to teach the prisoners dance yoga and meditation. And I could ask my friends to send me books. So I could educate myself. And I got so happy by being so, having that high fever and that image and that story of I could go to prison. And then I saw myself going that, the judge would say, okay, we give you only payment. So you don't have to go to prison if you pay that amount of money. And I would see myself in front of the judge and saying, no, I want to go to prison. No, I don't, please let me go to prison. I see myself writing to my assistant, what do I have to do to go to really to prison, directly into prison, no way around it. And it was so funny. It literally got my fever down. I mean, it literally got my fever down. So all the time when I went into this fear of it might happen again, I would come up with a story and I would get so happy. And I think, oh gosh, I don't have to pay my bills. I just can sit in prison and do what I love doing. And I think I'm telling that, first of all, many people love it. So sometimes when I talk with assistants of directors and they say, how are you doing? And they say, yeah, I do have my doubts with this company. And I say, I have a good story. I can talk about, we can meet in prison. And they always love it. Like, yes, that's plan B. Let's meet in prison one day if we don't get further. But I do think, even if this is a story that's very unusual, a lot of people would just desire to do something that they absolutely would love doing. But then, even if they do start doing what they love doing, because we do need to pay our check and our bills, we are living in a material world, so we do need to take care of that. And the pressure of it, and not knowing how you can do what you love doing and getting paid for that or sustain yourself in that's a story of a lot of women I know who want to come forward and live their passion and their purpose, but they have no clue how, or they struggle with it, or they struggle the whole life with it. um, so that was a kind of and then being okay and saying, okay, I could be okay with being in prison, but I could not be okay with, well, if I would land on the street, I would still take my little iPhone and do interviews, I think, in this regard. But I would dread the cold, because I do see people landing on the street here in Germany. And when we have winter time, I'm so full of compassion, how they live. And over Christmas, worked in a shelter where people who landed on the street would come and have meals. And um, I just felt a lot of compassion for them. And sometimes I was struck that these were people who were once successful or had a life. They were not all dumb and had no brains and would just let go and be on drugs. Some of them would really have a life, and that was a very sad story when you listen to that. So I think facing it and saying I'm okay with that, and we are not live in a warm country. That, to me, I don't even know how I could get there and be okay. Of course, I do understand this is an internal fear, and but people do land on the street, and people, when they get older, they do land on the street. And I'm asking a lot, what are you doing when you are self-employed? Did you take care of your age? And I said, I have to work until God takes me home. And he better takes me home if I cannot work anymore, because there is nothing that will then sustain me. And people are afraid of the poverty of age, and they are afraid that there's not enough money, particularly when you're in Europe, self-employed, because there's nothing that then takes care. And this seems not to be a genuine fear. This seems to be a very strong fear in people. But then I ask people, when in businesses, and I do have to strengthen their courage muscle. And then they're so afraid. And I think, why you're so afraid? Nobody's firing you. And even if you get fired in Germany, there's so many things that take care of you. So they also have the deep-seated fear. And it seems to be in people so deeply, even if they do have all the security of the world, that I think, gosh, you could be so happy. There's all the security you have, all the safety you have. Why are you not speaking up? Why are you not showing up in your strength? And don't try even to say the truth in a minor way in companies, because you're so afraid that at one point they will fire you or you will lose your face. Did I lose you? Are you asleep by now?
No, I'm here. I think there were a few branches to what you said that I wanted to talk about, but some of the earlier ones I've already forgotten. So I think this fear of being on the street, to me, you said it, that you faced your fear of being in prison, and when you faced it, you actually could see the positives of it. And
Yeah, but the prison wasn't the story. The prison was actually fully fine. In prison, I could have, my rent paid, in quotes. In prison, I would have my bread and water, and I could do what I would love doing without having to worry how I would make money about it.
okay,
So
so yeah,
what
so
prison was like heaven.
Okay, so what I see here is what to me, the archetypal kind of metaphor of what you're speaking about is freedom versus boundaries. Because in prison, your boundaries are all taken care of. I mean, you firstly your cell, so your home is taken care of, and your food is taken care of. Everything is taken care of, so everything is known. You have full limitation. Everything is limited. And in that, there's a certain safety in the limitation. Whereas out on the street, as much as out in the world, there's no limitation in a sense. It's like what we're really afraid of is the unknown. We're really afraid of not knowing where the next meal will come from. We're afraid
Mm.
of not knowing what to do and not knowing what's next. And we find comfort in creating boundaries and having boundaries where we know who we are, we know what's next, we know what to do, and that's how the mind works. The mind is trying to take care of us, it's trying to help us, it's trying to help us survive. And so it does that in many ways, one of which is to create a whole range of imaginary boundaries of who I am, who they are, what's going on, what's real, what's true, what I know. And some people find that those boundaries that the mind creates are not satisfying finally, that they actually become like an internal prison, so that then we start to seek freedom from our own internal prison of the mind.
But isn't that funny that I feel free in prison? I actually really wanted to do talk shows in prisons and talk about the freedom in your mind. And I was almost there. Then they didn't have the people who would take care of it, because I found this really intriguing. It was one of the big prisons in Berlin. I was
Mhm.
asking if I could do a talk show there with the prisoners as the audience. I found this really intriguing. But
So
coming back and
yeah, what I see in that, Janine, is that if you what you're saying is, if your survival is taken care of, then you're free.
Mhm. Yes.
So if the prison gives you the food and the accommodation and makes all your decisions for you in a sense, then you don't have to worry about survival, and then you're free, and then you can be happy. And that's very much what I'm speaking about, is that the preoccupation with survival in the mind, and our fear of survival, ends up taking up so much of our space internally that we feel that we can't be joyful and free because we're preoccupied with our safety, we're preoccupied with our survival. And
Well, many people do have that, preoccupied with their career, or I mean, money is still ruling the world. So being free of that pressure, even if you do have tons of money, you're still doing your career that has the pressure that you're not losing your face or image, or what do people, as you said
that's
it, think
right. But
about
that's why
me.
most people are suffering. And I know
Mm.
that there are people in Syria and in Africa and in certain places where their survival is paramount because there are bombs dropping and there are that you
Mm.
have to survive. And for those people, they don't have the chance to even listen to this podcast because they're too busy surviving, and that for them is what they have to meet in their life, and that's appropriate. But for many of the people listening to this interview, I would say you have survived. You have survived. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, you've survived enough that you have a computer, that you have a smartphone, and you have somewhere to live. And so then the question becomes, is survival enough? Like, is that what you want for your life? Do you want to just survive until you die? So that
Mm.
the moment before you die, you can say, yes, I did it. I made it. I survived until I died. Or do you want your life to be about something more than just survival? Do you want joy? Do you want love? Do you want freedom, happiness? Do you want fulfillment? And what I'm saying is that it is possible in this life to have fulfillment. It is possible in this life to feel the joy of being, of just simply being without trying to survive. And you can test it. That right now, you, Janine, and anybody else listening to this, right in this moment, what if for this moment you don't try to survive? What if you just simply be, just as you are? Don't change anything, fix anything, and just be. What is your experience of just being? And do you drop dead in this moment if you don't try to survive? And what it brings up is that there are moments where you do need to survive. If you're crossing the street, you have to watch out for cars. If you're in the war, you have to survive. If you're going to work, maybe then you have to do certain things to survive. But if you tell the truth, that there are moments where you don't need to be hyper vigilant to survival, where you can surrender, where you can just simply be. And maybe in that moment, you can enjoy your life rather than just simply surviving. And that goes for no matter what situation you're in. It is possible. I know that because when I surrendered, I didn't have any money, and I wasn't very good at surviving at all. And my whole life was obsessed with trying to survive through image, through success, and I wasn't very good at it. And so
Mm.
it wasn't that I waited until I was successful and then I was happy. It was the exact opposite. And this is key, I think, that for
Mm.
me it was the exact opposite. I was a failure. Things were not going well. I was depressed and anxious, and I became really obsessed with waking up from ego and really obsessed with being happy in this moment no matter what the circumstances were. And
Yes.
and I discovered that that was possible, and I actually opened and felt the bliss of just being alive, and the gratitude just to be alive just as I am without anything extra. And then any success that I had, and any financial success that I had, really came in the wake of that awakening. So that my happiness became a kind of contagious, and people wanted to hear from me, how do you do it, and what's the what's the secret. And in that, I became survived. In that, I was able to survive financially, let's say, and with food and rent and etc. But it came in the wave of my willingness to not survive and simply be as I am and welcome myself as I am.
I can very much relate to that. I think it not so long ago there was a shift happening. Um, I don't actually when and how, but I could feel there was this part, as you said, this causeless happiness or this willingness or this obsession about almost obsession about I want to be happy no never no matter what. That's number one. And there's still of course mind power in that. Um, but I could feel that when, you just have survived in quotes one emotional wave and then you feel happy and then the next challenge comes in the outside world or the next wave comes and it knocks you out and then you stand up again. but I could feel this total dedication to happiness get stronger and stronger, and that I would feel this islands or this moments of what I say the soul, the happy soul energy. And people would talk to me or would ask me, "Are you always so happy?" If they would see me a couple of times. And I would say, no, first, I can pretend very well. And second, there is always some happiness beyond. Um, and I can feel that. Now I'm wondering if the world is always a kind of, there's always this perfection and this happiness beyond, and then on the outer world there is always this mess, because in the world we cannot fix anything anyway. It's built of ego and not from love. Or is this when you are having more awakened moments, is then the outer world changing towards it? I remember the statement saying, um, I am the world. I am what I see in the world. Yeah, that's what somebody told me. I am what I see in the world. And that's a yucky statement if you don't see a nice world and you think, oh, I actually need to change it. But I do feel that in those small moments when I feel very awake, that I see way more beauty and things are way more humorous. And sometimes it almost feels like there is a stream of thought saying, just laugh about it, just laugh about it. And I can feel that laughter inside, although on the surface I don't experience it. But inside, deep, deep inside, I can feel something bubbling up.
Yes, I think there's two things. One is it's definitely true that we do not see the world as it is. We see it through the lens of our own fixated conditioning, and so the willingness to suspend how you see the world and to see it without a story can reveal something different. And that it's true that if you are in deep gratitude for being alive, then everything you see is like a gift. Whereas if you're in conflict with yourself, then everything you see outside will reflect that too. You'll be in conflict with everything outside. My discovery is that there is no world separate to who I am, that who I am and the world are one and the same, that I am life, and life is expressing itself through this form that people call Jared, that life is expressing through your form, and that it's the same life. And so when I see you, I see myself. And but that is not something I've convinced myself of. That is something I actually have seen and recognized to be true. And so in that there's a certain unity and a oneness, and actually that links to the other thing I was going to say, which is that the idealization that life should be just kind of perfect, and that if you awaken everything is wonderful. That's really not true. That awakening is really when you stop judging one moment against the next. All people have are susceptible to the same ups and downs, no matter what. I have the same ups and downs. There are people that don't like me. There are mistakes that I make all the time. I can even, I say things that sometimes I realize later. It's like, oh, did I really say that? And so it's the same ups and downs happen for me and Eckhart Tolle and anybody. The difference is that I don't. My identity does not go up and down depending on what happens to me. So I don't feel like I'm less of a person if I make a mistake. Whereas in the past, failure meant that I am a failure. Now,
Mm.
failure is just a natural part of existence. I mean, that's how evolution works. It works on failure. The genetic mutations that don't work, they disappear. And what's left is what does survive. And so failure is an important part of existence. And so for me, there's an open acceptance of everything without a judgment and a comparison, so that maybe I do have preferences, but if I don't get my preference, it's okay because I'm alive. And so what if someone doesn't like me? So what if I make a
Mm.
mistake? None of that affects my idea or my sense of who I am, because I know who I am, and who I am is not an object that gets better or worse over time. Who I am is the space within which these objects appear and disappear. And so there's a surrender, and my emotions don't go up and down depending on what's happening. And that's the only difference. So there's a certain perfection in everything being just as it is, including all the imperfections, just simply in not fighting with it and not judging it and not telling a story about it, simply letting everything be as it is. There's a certain perfection that's here. But it's not the idealized perfection that people think, that I thought when I
Mm.
wanted to be awakened and I wanted enlightenment. My thought was that once I'm enlightened, then I'll be this amazing person and everybody will like me. Which is
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really like that you say this because first, because we're talking about diving into the soul, how that feels, and we have something in store that we will tell the listeners later when we complete this interview. Um, but this one moment where I felt my soul is really happy, like I call it my soul. My soul feels my life is a big success when I felt I'm absolutely not successful. I'm ashamed of that. And then I could feel that my soul was like feeling, no, it's very successful. I could almost feel like I'm looking on my life through the eyes of my soul. And there was a really huge curiosity that felt came forward, and no judgment, just looking at life experience with wonder, with curiosity, with a distance. But I don't want to say childlike, lighthearted would be the right word. Okay, now it is recording. Dear listeners, we are so sorry the internet broke, and we are hoping now that we can complete and finish with the interview. We were talking about looking through the lens of the soul, how it felt. And when you said, Jared, you said about that, you were just happy. There was no agenda with this. And this is what I always was thinking with the manifestation wave that we're in. You can manifest everything you want, you can desire everything you want. And then people talk about quantum field, and they talk about connecting to God, Jesus, the universe, with different languages. And I think, but now you're doing the same like before. You're creating from your ego. How can you create from your ego? Because the ego never knows, and the ego will never do what you really want, what you really are. So it's always the same loop again. It just sounds better. The frame it's wrapped up in a better gift.
Yes, I think the ego really is primarily about survival. That's what the ego is for. It's a survival upgrade to the human brain that helps us to take care of this unit. So it says, this is me, this is the most important thing in the world, and I need to take care of it. So most of our desires, let's say, on the egoic level are around money and respect and all this stuff that you can actually trace back to survival. And so to actually discover what you love is to discover what do you love if you're not surviving. If survival's not an issue, just like you being in the prison, then you get to do what you love. In the same way, internally, if you don't have to survive, if you had free choice, if you were free, then what do you love? And then that reveals what you love, and you go for it, survival or no survival. And that's what really ultimately happened to me, is that I discovered happiness and freedom, and then what I love was just here. It was just natural. It was natural to feel what I love and to love what I love and to do what I love. And then the money and the survival stuff came later as a side effect of that. So it is when you're trying to manifest what you want, but you don't really know at the deepest level what you want, when really you're run by survival, then you're trying to manifest survival, but you already are alive. You're already here. You're already right in this moment. You don't have to survive. In this second, you don't have to survive. You may need to make decisions about work and about money and about living and relationship, and those decisions will come naturally if you really are willing to to open to this moment fully without surviving, then you see that, yeah, we naturally survive. You will make those decisions. You're all making those decisions. You can trust yourself.
And what you say is the key, like being natural about it. And I do have to come back to the manifestation wave again, because this is like the new spiritual wave. And it comes wrapped in living your purpose. It comes, in different colors now. But my favorite sentence is always, it's just whipped cream on another piece of shit, but underneath is still the shit. And I just wonder when you're saying this, because people would say, you do work hard, and you do have your ego in check, and you don't go back to the addiction of emotions or emotions that hold you back. But people do report that they do a lot of work, and then they do have the money they wanted. They do have the purposeful work they wanted. They even do have a partner they wanted. And then they report, now I'm really happy. But is this just another trick? Are they going to be happy until, that toy is over? Because it looks like, aha, okay, here you didn't do the work. Now you listened to whoever, and you're sitting there, you don't do anything about it, so you didn't get anywhere. Now this person shows you she or he got everything in the world and is endlessly happy for the rest of for the rest of his or her life. Um,
I would just
do you
say,
understand what I'm
yeah, I would just say, look,
asking?
some people are lucky and some people are also naturally awake in a sense. They're naturally able to feel what they feel, to know what they love, and to go for it. And those people are lucky.
Mm,
And I used to always be envious of those people. But what I
yes.
found was that in the fact that I couldn't do it, the fact that I was a failure and that I was anxious and depressed, actually pushed me to discover a certain kind of happiness that is so much deeper than having material possessions and even having the job that you loved. Like I said, my happiness came before I found the work that I love. So what
Mm,
I'm saying is there is a deeper fulfillment that is not conditional on objects, because if it's conditional on objects, then if it's taken away, then you won't have your happiness anymore. So if your happiness is dependent on a job, or dependent on the way your personality is, or it's dependent on your body, or it's dependent on your emotions, then you'll find that those are all limited. Those all come and go. And one day they will go. That's for sure. One day you will lose everything. And I'm speaking of facing the loss of everything to discover what's already here, deeper than job, deeper than survival, to see that actually our essence is happiness, our nature is happiness,
mm.
our nature is joy, intelligence, kindness, openness, bliss. That is our nature. But you can't know your nature unless you're willing to meet your nature. And to meet your nature, it means it's natural. It means you have to give up trying to do something else or trying to get away from yourself. You have to welcome yourself fully, open to yourself, open to this moment, and discover what is naturally here if I don't do anything, and if I don't try, and if I don't figure it out, and if I don't have a strategy. What is naturally here at the root. And
You always catch me at the end, always at the end of our interview. There's like, yes, I can feel it. It's like being in front of a swing door, and the door opens, and then it's like, yes, I can understand it. And the door just swings close again, and then it opens again. And I think I try to grasp it, what you're saying, and then I don't understand it, and then it's going open again. But I do understand what you're talking about, and I do completely relate to failure, to not getting what you want, to not succeeding in what you want. I always wanted to be Oprah of Europe. I mean, that's a very funny story also. But I was very devastated when the whole traditional media would just fall apart, and all the new podcasters who never saw a microphone would just be the podcast queen or the podcast king in the world. And they were barely 19 or 18. So that made me very jealous. And because I had learned my craft somehow, and I wanted always to go back, but in not getting what I wanted and feeling failing or feeling depressed about that, there was this extreme strong will that I always had like you. I wanted to be happy no matter what is happening. Um, and I can almost feel it, like when you are talking now, I almost feel like it is a grace to sometimes not getting what you want, because then you are not on the surface hunting and chasing it. You're not getting it anyway, you think, so why do I bother? And then you start to dig deeper in something, and I think that's the biggest reward. Yeah, I just
Yes, it's
barely
beautiful,
touch
and
it.
that's the challenge is something touches you, and there's this desire to keep it or hold it or make it or understand it more, and what I would say is that what's touching you is an opening of your mind where your boundaries of your mind are loosening, and so I would say don't try to understand what I'm saying, don't try to figure it out, and don't try to keep it and hold it.
Mm.
And what you'll find is that what's here is a certain openness that is free. And you'll find it's always here. So if you try to keep it, you'll lose it because it's already here. And if you try to figure it out, you'll lose it because it's not.
Yes,
It, it's
that's
not something you can
also,
figure out. It
yeah.
just is as it is.
Sometimes don't you think, what a fucking life? Can we not just live what already is here and not having to, go through all those emotions and layers? And who told us? When did we decide to go through this whole long journey to go home again? I mean, we are home, like you would say. You are already home, Janine. You don't have to go anywhere. The journey without distance. But
Yeah,
boy, what a
that's what
journey.
makes it fun.
What a
And
journey.
it doesn't seem like fun when you're suffering. I really understand that. But when you really recognize that the suffering is all imaginary, that you see this whole thing is a big joke. It's a great big cosmic joke, and it's a tragic comedy. And it's both absolutely despairing and absolutely hilarious. And so I don't look at the challenges as oh, I wish I didn't have to go through that. I actually am very grateful for the challenges, and I'm very very grateful for them pushing me from control to surrender, from judgment to an open mind, and from survival to love.
Yeah, that's the part that I'm still not figuring out, not trying to get. Let's say it differently. I'm getting very quiet, and because I could zip it, I could feel short seconds and moments of what you're talking about, and that makes almost addicted. You felt it, and you try to hold on to it, and then it's going away again. um, but what I learned today is become very quiet, very quiet. And, if you try to fix it or if you chase it, then in your wanting, you are going away from yourself. And I could see, like, no, 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 stay with yourself, stay right here, right where you
Yes.
are, and become very quiet. And then
Yes, and
I
that
can more relate
quiet,
to
it's
what you're
so
saying
deep,
now.
it's so deeply silent that all the old ways of seeing the world start to disappear, and you start to see reality for what it is rather than what you think it is.
Thank you so much. I will have a very deep sleep when I go to bed, like in a second. You just start your day. Dear listeners, your feedback, your experiences, your lessons learned or unlearned is very welcome. So please post us underneath about how you feel about it and how you resonate or not resonate with it. Jared and I have decided actually to create a soul series together, and it's going to be on human topics from a soul's perspective. So this is going to be awesome and exciting, and we are going to discuss after the interview how we're going to do it thoughtfully. So wherever you are, have a soulful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. This was NGW Radio Hour with Jad Frings in New Zealand and Janine Vanzinas in Germany. Bye for now.